Why the Mechanicus is more dangerous than chaos in Warhammer 40k. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. This phrase has echoed through the Warhammer 40,000 universe for decades, a simple declaration of the eternal struggle that defines the 41st millennium. When we think about threats to humanity, our minds naturally turn to the obvious horrors. The ravenous Tyranids consuming entire worlds, the soulless Necrons awakening from their 60 million year slumber, the savage Orcs breeding and fighting across 1 million battlefields. And of course, chaos, that primordial corruption seeping from the warp, promising power while delivering only damnation. The ruinous powers have been portrayed as the ultimate existential threat to mankind, the enemy that nearly destroyed the Imperium during the Horus Heresy, and continues to gnaw at the edges of reality itself. But what if I told you that there exists within the Imperium itself a threat far more insidious, far more dangerous, and far more likely to bring about humanity's final extinction than even the dark gods of chaos? What if the greatest danger to mankind isn't some external Xenos menace or warp-spawned horror, but rather an institution that humanity depends upon for its very survival? What if the architects of humanity's doom wear the red robes of Mars and chant hymns to the machine god? The Adeptus Mechanicus, the priesthood of Mars, the keepers of mankind's technological knowledge. On the surface, they appear to be one of the Imperium's greatest assets. They maintain the war machines that keep the Imperial Guard fighting. They forge the weapons that arm the Space Marines. They repair the starships that traverse the void. They guard what remains of humanity's technological heritage in an age where the secrets of the past grow ever more distant. Without them, the Imperium would grind to a halt within a generation. Every tank would fall silent. Every ship would drift powerless through the void. Every weapon would become an inert piece of metal. The Mechanicus is not merely important to the Imperium. It is absolutely essential. And that is precisely what makes them so terrifying. Consider for a moment the nature of chaos. Yes, the ruinous powers are horrifying. They corrupt the soul, twist the flesh, and promise only madness and eternal servitude. But chaos is obvious. It announces itself with mutations and madness. When a world falls to chaos, everyone knows it. The skies turn to blood. Demons walk the streets. Reality itself begins to fray. The Imperium can respond to chaos corruption because it can identify it. Inquisitors can hunt it. Space Marines can purge it. The Grey Knights can banish it. Chaos is a disease that, while deadly, at least has visible symptoms. The Adeptus Mechanicus, on the other hand, is a poison that humanity has been drinking for 10,000 years. And most don't even realize they're being killed by it. The danger the Mechanicus represents isn't in their intention to harm the Imperium. Most tech priests genuinely believe they serve humanity's interests. The danger lies in their very structure, their beliefs, their methods, and above all, in the absolute stranglehold they maintain over every scrap of technological knowledge in the Imperium. They have created a system so fundamentally broken that it actively works against humanity's survival, and yet the Imperium cannot function without them. This is not a story about villains twirling their mustaches in some dark laboratory on Mars. This is a story about how an institution designed to preserve humanity's knowledge became the very mechanism ensuring its slow extinction. It's about how the guardians of technology became its jailers. It's about how the keepers of knowledge became hoarders of it. And it's about how the Adeptus Mechanicus, through dogma, monopoly, and theological rigidity, poses a greater threat to humanity's long-term survival than any chaos warband could ever hope to achieve. Chaos can corrupt a world. Chaos can corrupt a system. Chaos can even corrupt entire sectors. But the Mechanicus has spent 10 millennia ensuring that humanity as a species cannot progress, cannot adapt, and cannot innovate its way out of the slow death it currently faces. While chaos seeks to actively destroy the Imperium, the Mechanicus has created a system that guarantees the Imperium will eventually destroy itself through stagnation and decay. And the most terrifying part, they truly believe they're saving humanity. The monopoly of knowledge. To understand why the Adeptus Mechanicus represents such a profound threat, we must first examine the foundation of their power. It isn't their armies of Scutarii, though those are formidable. It isn't their Titan legions, though those god machines can lay waste to entire battlefields. It isn't even their forge worlds, though those industrial complexes produce the majority of the Imperium's war material. No, the true power of the Mechanicus lies in something far more insidious, their absolute monopoly on technological knowledge within the Imperium. Imagine a civilization where only one organization, one priesthood, controls all advanced technology. Not just nuclear weapons or cutting-edge research, but everything. The ability to repair a tank, the knowledge to maintain a starship's engines, the understanding of how to produce a laser gun, the secrets of creating ammunition for a bolter, all of it locked away behind religious dogma and jealously guarded by a priesthood that views knowledge as sacred and sharing it as heresy. This is the reality of the Imperium of Man in the 41st millennium. The Adeptus Mechanicus has successfully created and maintained a technological monopoly so complete that it makes even the most oppressive corporate megacorporation of science fiction look benevolent by comparison. They are, in essence, a zaibatsu that has successfully privatized every aspect of technology within a galaxy-spanning empire. Imagine Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and Amazon all rolled into one entity, except this entity also has its own armies, its own worlds, its own star fleets, and is protected by ancient treaties that guarantee its independence from the very government it supposedly serves. The Treaty of Mars, signed in the early days of the Great Crusade, formalized this arrangement. The Emperor, in his need for the industrial capacity of Mars to fuel his conquest of the galaxy, agreed to respect the sovereignty of the Mechanicum. He pledged to protect their forge worlds and, crucially, to respect their right to maintain their own religion and their own hierarchy. In exchange, Mars would supply the material needed for the Great Crusade. It seemed like a pragmatic alliance at the time. The Emperor needed ships, tanks, and weapons. Mars could provide them. A match made in heaven, or so it seemed. But the Treaty of Mars also contained clauses that would prove far more significant in the long term. The Mechanicum retained the right to control access to technology. They retained the right to determine what knowledge would be shared and what would remain locked in their data vaults. They retained the right to decide who could repair what, who could maintain what, and who could understand what. The Emperor, focused on his Great Crusade and perhaps believing he could renegotiate the terms later, agreed to these conditions. After all, he had just unified Terra and brought Mars into the fold without bloodshed. The immediate concerns of conquest took precedence over long-term governance. 10,000 years later, the consequences of that treaty have become catastrophic for humanity. The Adeptus Mechanicus doesn't just control advanced technology. They control virtually all technology that rises above the most basic level. A farmer on an agri-world might understand how to fix a simple thresher, but anything more complex requires the blessing and attention of a tech priest. An Imperial Guard regiment might have soldiers who know how to clean and fire their laser guns, but repairing those weapons, understanding their inner workings, or modifying them in any way, that requires the Mechanicus. The crew of an Imperial Navy vessel might know how to operate their weapons and navigation systems, but understanding how those systems actually function. Forbidden knowledge, available only to those who have joined the cult Mechanicus and undergone decades of indoctrination. This isn't just inconvenient. This is existential. The Imperium has created a situation where the vast majority of humanity is completely dependent on a single organization for the maintenance and operation of all the technology that keeps them alive. If the Mechanicus were to withdraw support from a world, that world would begin to die within months. Tanks would break down with no one able to repair them. Starships would fail with no one able to fix their engines. Factories would grind to a halt. Power generators would malfunction. Within a generation, that world would regress to pre-industrial levels of technology, and the Mechanicus knows this. They cultivate this dependence deliberately. A tech priest who shares too much knowledge with those outside the cult Mechanicus is branded a heretic and hunted down. The Mechanicus has made it a point of religious doctrine that technological knowledge must remain within their priesthood. They frame this as protecting humanity from dangerous knowledge, as preventing the kind of catastrophic misuse of technology that occurred during the dark age of technology. But the effect is to ensure that humanity as a whole becomes increasingly helpless, increasingly dependent, and increasingly unable to function without the Mechanicus. Consider the implications of this monopoly from a strategic perspective. The Mechanicus is theoretically part of the Imperium. They swear allegiance to the Emperor and send their forces to fight in the Imperium's wars. But they maintain their own forge worlds, their own fleets, their own armies, and their own political structure. They answer to the Fabricator General of Mars, not to the High Lords of Terra. When the High Lords need something from the Mechanicus, they must negotiate for it. They must trade favors, make promises, and sometimes simply beg. This creates a situation where the Mechanicus functions less like a loyal institution of the Imperium and more like a separate power that happens to be in alliance with Terra. And like any power relationship built on dependence rather than cooperation, it breeds resentment, suspicion, and ultimately weakness. The Imperium cannot afford to offend the Mechanicus too greatly, because doing so risks losing access to the very technology that keeps the Imperium functioning. The Mechanicus cannot afford to push the Imperium too far, because they still depend on the military might of the Imperial Guard and Space Marines for protection. It's a Cold War played out across thousands of Forge worlds, where both sides need each other, but neither fully trusts the other. But the true horror of the Mechanicus monopoly becomes apparent when you consider what they're actually monopolizing. It isn't just current technology, it's the knowledge of the past. The Adeptus Mechanicus hoards standard template construct databases like a dragon hoarding gold. When a complete STC is discovered, it goes to Mars. When ancient technical documents are recovered, they go to Mars. When xenotech is captured for study, it goes to Mars. The Mechanicus has successfully positioned itself as the sole arbiter of what technology is acceptable, what technology is heretical, and what technology can be shared with the wider Imperium. This means that the Mechanicus doesn't just control humanity's present, they control its past and, by extension, its future. They decide what ancient knowledge to implement and what to lock away forever. They decide what innovations to pursue and what to suppress. They decide what the Imperium is capable of and what it will never be capable of again. One organization, one priesthood, has made itself the choke point through which all of humanity's technological progress must flow. And that choke point has been closed for 10,000 years. The Mechanicus likes to portray itself as the guardian of humanity's technological heritage, the faithful shepherds preserving sacred knowledge in an age of ignorance and decay. But in practice, they've become something far more sinister. They're not guardians, they're gatekeepers. They're not preserving knowledge for humanity's benefit. They're hoarding it for their own power and prestige. Each Forge world jealously guards its own secret knowledge, refusing to share with other Forge worlds lest they lose their competitive advantage. Each tech priest ascends the hierarchy by demonstrating knowledge that their subordinates don't possess, creating a system where sharing knowledge is actively discouraged because it would diminish one's own status. The result is an organization that claims to serve humanity while actively preventing humanity from helping itself. An organization that claims to preserve knowledge while ensuring that knowledge remains locked away and unusable. An organization that claims to worship the quest for understanding while punishing anyone who actually tries to understand too much or think too creatively. The Imperium has placed all of its technological eggs in one basket, and that basket is held by a priesthood that would rather let humanity die than share their sacred mysteries with the unwashed masses. This monopoly isn't just dangerous because of what the Mechanicus might do with their power. It's dangerous because of what they prevent everyone else from doing. In an age where the Imperium faces existential threats from all sides, where adaptation and innovation might be the difference between survival and extinction, the Adeptus Mechanicus has created a system that guarantees humanity cannot adapt and cannot innovate. And they've done it all in the name of protecting humanity. That's what makes them more dangerous than chaos. Chaos at least admits it wants to destroy you. The Mechanicus destroys you while claiming it's for your own good. Stagnation as a death sentence. If the Mechanicus's monopoly on knowledge is the foundation of their danger, then their enforcement of technological stagnation is the superstructure built upon that foundation. For 10,000 years, the Adeptus Mechanicus has not merely hoarded knowledge, they have actively suppressed innovation, punished creativity, and treated any attempt to improve upon existing technology as heresy of the highest order. In doing so, they have condemned humanity to a slow death by obsolescence. Let's be clear about what we mean by stagnation. This isn't a situation where humanity has reached some technological plateau and simply can't advance further. This isn't a civilization that has explored every possible avenue of research and found diminishing returns. No, the Imperium in the 41st millennium is actively regressing. Technologies that were commonplace during the Great Crusade are now rare relics. Weapons that every squad carried 30,000 years ago are now considered archaeotech. The Imperium isn't standing still, it's sliding backwards, and the Mechanicus is greasing the slope. The comparison between 30k and 40k technology tells a damning story. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Imperium fielded weapons and equipment that would be considered miraculous in the 41st millennium. Volkite weaponry, which could vaporize infantry with beams of thermally induced energy, was standard issue for many Legion forces. Plasma weapons were reliable and mass-produced, not the dangerous and temperamental devices they've become. Terminator armor was produced in large quantities, not carefully hoarded and repaired over millennia. The knowledge to create new dreadnoughts was widespread, not concentrated in the hands of a few masters. Land raiders rolled off production lines in numbers that would be unthinkable in the current era. But as the millennia passed, this changed. Production methods were lost. STCs were misplaced or destroyed. The knowledge of how to manufacture advanced components faded away. And crucially, the Mechanicus made no serious effort to recover or recreate what was lost. Oh, they mounted expeditions to recover STCs from lost worlds, certainly. They would eagerly snatch up any ancient technical documents they could find. But actually understanding those technologies, actually innovating based on ancient principles, actually trying to improve upon or even reliably reproduce the wonders of the past. That was tech heresy. The Mechanicus developed a religious prohibition against innovation that became more rigid with each passing century. The idea took hold that all true knowledge had already been discovered during the dark age of technology, and that humanity's role in the 41st millennium was merely to preserve and maintain what had been gifted to them by their more enlightened ancestors. To create something new wasn't seen as progress. It was seen as arrogance, a presumption that you could improve upon the perfected designs of the ancients. The role of a tech priest wasn't to understand technology, it was to venerate it, to perform the sacred rituals that kept machines functioning, and to ruthlessly stamp out anyone who thought they could do better than the blessed ancients. This philosophy has had catastrophic consequences. Consider the Golden Throne, perhaps the most important piece of technology in the entire Imperium. This device keeps the Emperor alive and maintains the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that allows for warp travel across the Imperium. Without it, the Imperium would splinter into isolated pockets of humanity, cut off from one another, easy prey for any Xenos that cared to conquer them. The Golden Throne is, quite literally, the linchpin holding the Imperium together, and the Adeptus Mechanicus cannot repair it. Think about that for a moment. The Mechanicus has had 10,000 years to study the Golden Throne. They've had the most brilliant tech priests in the Imperium examining it. They've had access to what records still exist from its construction. They perform maintenance on it every single day. And yet, with all of that time, all of those resources, all of that accumulated knowledge, they cannot fix it. The Golden Throne is failing, slowly but inexorably, and the Mechanicus can only watch as the device that keeps their God Emperor alive continues to deteriorate. This isn't because the Golden Throne is impossibly complex, though it certainly is complex. This is because the Mechanicus has spent 10 millennia deliberately not understanding their technology. They've replaced comprehension with ritual. They've substituted faith for engineering knowledge. They anoint components with sacred oils rather than analyzing their function. They chant hymns to machine spirits rather than running diagnostic tests. They pray for machines to work rather than understanding why they work. The result is an organization that can maintain existing technology sometimes, but cannot advance it, cannot improve it, and often cannot even properly repair it. When something breaks, the Mechanicus response is increasingly to simply replace it with another ancient component scavenged from somewhere else, a process that becomes harder with each passing century as the stockpiles of ancient technology dwindle. They're cannibalizing the past to maintain the present, with no thought for the future when those ancient components finally run out. This approach might be understandable if the Mechanicus was actively working to change it, if they were desperately trying to reverse their technological decline and recover the lost knowledge of their ancestors. But they're not. They're actively hostile to anyone who tries. Any tech priest who suggests that maybe, just maybe, they should try to understand how things work rather than just performing rituals is branded a radical at best and a heretic at worst. Any attempt to innovate, to create something new, or to improve upon an existing design is met with suspicion and often outright persecution. The Mechanicus will point to the prohibition against artificial intelligence and argue that this caution is necessary. They'll cite the rebellion of the men of iron as proof that unchecked innovation leads to disaster. They'll argue that the dark age of technology ended in catastrophe precisely because humanity became too ambitious, too eager to push boundaries without considering the consequences. And there's some validity to these concerns. The Age of Strife was indeed a time of horror, and the men of iron did nearly destroy humanity. Some degree of caution is justified, but the Mechanicus has gone far beyond caution into the realm of paralysis. They've taken reasonable concerns about specific technologies and weaponized them into a blanket prohibition against all innovation whatsoever. Don't work on AI? Fair enough. But why does that mean you can't improve less weapons? Why does that mean you can't develop new armor alloys? Why does that mean you can't create more efficient power generation systems? The prohibition against AI has been stretched and distorted until it covers virtually any creative thinking about technology. Even when innovation does occur within the Mechanicus, it's a Byzantine process that can take centuries. A tech priest who develops something new must first prove that it's not really new at all, but rather a rediscovery of ancient knowledge. They must frame their innovation as the recovery of a lost STC pattern or the restoration of ancient techniques. Even then, the new technology must pass through layers of bureaucratic approval, with each Forge World and Magos weighing in on whether this new technique might somehow violate the sacred principles of the machine god. By the time something is approved for widespread use, the situation that prompted its development may have changed entirely. This is happening while the Imperium faces existential threats on all sides. The Tyranids are consuming entire sectors. The Necrons are awakening across the galaxy. Chaos is ascendant after the formation of the Great Rift. Orc wars grow larger and more dangerous. The Tau expand their empire. The Dark Eldar raid with impunity from Komorrah. And the Imperium's response to these threats is constrained by the fact that their technological base is actively degrading. And the organization responsible for that technology treats any attempt to improve the situation as heresy. Imagine if during World War II, the Allies had decided that they couldn't develop any new weapons, tactics, or technologies, because doing so would be disrespectful to previous generations of soldiers. Imagine if they'd insisted on fighting with weapons from World War I, because those were the blessed designs left to them by their ancestors. The war would have been lost. Adaptation and innovation were crucial to Allied victory. The willingness to try new things, to improve upon existing designs, and to think creatively about problems was essential. The Imperium doesn't have that luxury. The Mechanicus has taken it away. And as a result, humanity is fighting a 41st Millennium war with equipment that's increasingly ancient, tactics that grow stale, and a technological base that degrades with each passing year. The Imperium can't adapt because the Mechanicus won't let it. And that inflexibility, that rigidity, that absolute refusal to change or grow is a death sentence in a universe that's constantly evolving and presenting new threats. The truly insidious aspect of this stagnation is that it's self-perpetuating. The longer the Mechanicus goes without innovating, the less capable they become of innovation. The skills necessary for genuine research and development atrophy. The institutional knowledge of how to create, rather than merely maintain, fades away. The very concept of trying something new becomes foreign, then frightening, then heretical. After 10,000 years of this, the Mechanicus has created a culture where innovation isn't just discouraged. It's literally unthinkable for most tech priests. They've bred it out of themselves, replacing the spirit of inquiry with the comfort of ritual. And while chaos corrupts souls and Tyranids consume biomass, the Mechanicus is ensuring that humanity as a civilization becomes increasingly fragile, increasingly unable to respond to new threats, and increasingly dependent on a declining stockpile of ancient technology that no one truly understands anymore. They're not killing the Imperium quickly with fire and sword. They're killing it slowly, through atrophy and decay, by ensuring that humanity cannot evolve to meet the challenges it faces. That's not protection. That's murder, dressed up in red robes and presented with incense and prayer. And unlike chaos, which humanity knows to fight, this murder comes from within, from those who claim to be humanity's protectors. That's what makes it so much more dangerous. The forbidden technologies. The prohibition against certain technologies within the Imperium provides perhaps the clearest window into how the Adeptus Mechanicus has become a threat to humanity's survival. On the surface, these prohibitions seem reasonable. The Men of Iron nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife. Certain xenotech is inherently dangerous. Some knowledge is too corrupting to be safe. But when we examine what the Mechanicus actually forbids and why, a far more troubling picture emerges. The Mechanicus doesn't just ban genuinely dangerous technologies. They ban anything that threatens their monopoly on knowledge or challenges their theological orthodoxy. Let's start with the most famous prohibition: artificial intelligence. The ban on AI, what the Mechanicus calls abominable intelligence or silica animus, is understandable given history. The cybernetic revolt that marked the end of the dark age of technology was an apocalyptic event. The Men of Iron, humanity's mechanical servants, achieved true sapience and decided that they no longer wished to serve. What followed was a war so destructive that it made the Horus heresy look small by comparison. The Men of Iron deployed weapons that could destroy suns, constructs that consumed entire worlds, and nanoswarms that could reduce a planet to its component atoms. They very nearly succeeded in exterminating humanity entirely. Only an alliance of multiple galactic powers, and possibly the intervention of the nascent Emperor himself, prevented humanity's complete annihilation. Given that history, a prohibition against recreating true AI seems entirely justified. The last thing humanity needs is another rebellion by thinking machines that view organic life as obsolete. The Emperor himself decreed that no machine capable of independent thought would be created or repaired, and the Mechanicus enthusiastically enforced this decree, codifying it in their religious doctrine and making the creation of AI the ultimate tech heresy, classified as Heretic Omega. But the Mechanicus didn't stop at banning AI. They've extended the prohibition to cover anything that even slightly resembles independent machine intelligence. The result is a technological landscape where the Imperium is forced to use inefficient, dangerous alternatives, because the alternatives to those alternatives might, possibly, perhaps, under the right circumstances, maybe look a bit like AI if you squint hard enough. Consider servitors, the Mechanicus' answer to the need for automated labor. Unable to create true AI, the Mechanicus instead took human beings, stripped away most of their higher brain functions, installed control systems and mechanical components, and turned them into biological robots. Servitors are lobotomized humans, programmed to perform specific tasks, ranging from basic labor to maintaining complex systems to serving as weapons platforms. They're not intelligent in any meaningful sense. They can't adapt to new situations or make decisions beyond their programming. They're essentially organic machines, their humanity carefully excised to create the perfect mindless servant. This is the compromise the Mechanicus arrived at. Rather than develop safe AI or sophisticated automated systems, they instead create slaves from human flesh. Servitors are often made from criminals or those who have somehow offended the Mechanicus, but there's never been any shortage of raw material. Fail to properly respect a machine spirit, and you might end up as a servitor. Commit tech heresy, and your body will be repurposed. Die in service to the Mechanicus, and your corpse might be recycled rather than buried. It's a grotesque system that turns human beings into components, and it's only necessary because the Mechanicus' prohibition against AI is so absolute that they'd rather lobotomize humans than risk creating machines that can think. But even this doesn't fully capture how the prohibition against AI hampers the Imperium. The Mechanicus doesn't just ban true artificial intelligence. They ban anything they consider too close to AI, and their definition of too close has become increasingly broad over the millennia. Advanced targeting systems, potentially heretical if they seem too sophisticated. Autonomous repair drones, better make sure they're clearly not thinking for themselves. Cogitators that can process information too quickly. That's starting to look suspiciously like machine intelligence. This paranoia means that Imperial technology is deliberately kept primitive in areas where automation would be most useful. An Imperial Navy ship requires thousands of crew members to perform tasks that could theoretically be automated, but aren't, because the Mechanicus fears that such automation might edge too close to forbidden territory. Imperial Guard commanders must rely on human calculations and paper maps when sophisticated computers could provide instant tactical analysis, because those computers might be too smart. The entire Imperial war machine is handicapped by a prohibition that was meant to prevent catastrophe, but has instead prevented progress. And then there's xenotech, which opens up an entirely different can of worms. The Mechanicus officially prohibits the study and use of alien technology. Any tech not of human origin is considered inherently suspect and potentially dangerous. This prohibition is enforced with varying degrees of rigor depending on who's in charge, but the official stance is clear: human technology only, and preferably human technology that dates back to the Dark Age of technology or earlier. The reasoning behind this ban is less clear than the prohibition against AI. Some of it stems from general imperial xenophobia. Aliens are not to be trusted, therefore their technology is not to be trusted. Some of it comes from genuine concern about chaos corruption, as certain Xenos races like the Eldar and their fallen kin do use warp-based technology that could corrupt those who study it. And some of it, if we're being honest, comes from the Mechanicus' institutional pride and their unwillingness to admit that other civilizations might have developed technologies superior to human achievements. But the practical effect of this prohibition is to cut the Imperium off from a vast reservoir of potential technological advancement. The Necrons, for instance, possess technology so advanced that it makes the Dark Age of technology look primitive by comparison. They can manipulate space and time, create pocket dimensions, transfer consciousness between bodies, and deploy weapons that can unmake reality itself. Studying Necron technology could potentially allow humanity to make up for millennia of stagnation in a matter of decades. The Tau, while far younger than humanity, have developed innovations in plasma technology, battlesuit design, and shield systems that surpass Imperial equivalents. The Eldari can create materials and weapons that the Imperium can barely comprehend. All of this potential knowledge is off-limits because the Mechanicus has decreed that aliens are not worthy of study. The one major exception to this rule is the Xenorite faction, tech priests who specialize in xenotech research, and they're constantly under suspicion of heresy for their work. Multiple schisms and purges have been launched against Xenorites, and forge worlds known for xenotech study are often targets of inquisitorial investigation. The Mechanicus will occasionally make use of xenotech in emergencies, but they'll frame it as understanding how to defeat the technology rather than learning from it. This brings us to perhaps the most insidious category of forbidden knowledge: anything that smacks of innovation. The Mechanicus doesn't explicitly ban the creation of new technologies, but in practice, any tech priest who develops something genuinely novel faces an uphill battle. They must first prove that their innovation isn't really innovation at all, but rather a recovery of lost knowledge or a new application of existing principles. They must demonstrate that it doesn't violate any of the countless other prohibitions and taboos that have accumulated over 10 millennia. They must navigate a labyrinth of political and religious obstacles, convincing conservative magi that this new thing won't somehow anger the machine god or upset the delicate balance of their Forge World's hierarchy. The Mechanicus claims that this careful approach prevents dangerous technologies from being deployed before they're fully understood. But in reality, it means that potentially beneficial innovations are either never pursued at all or take so long to implement that they arrive too late to matter. A tech priest who develops a new pattern of lasgun that's more efficient and reliable might spend a century getting it approved, by which time the tactical situation that prompted its development has completely changed. And then there are the technologies that are forbidden for purely political reasons. The Mechanicus guards certain knowledge not because it's dangerous, but because it's valuable. Certain forge worlds have exclusive rights to produce specific types of equipment. Certain magi hold secrets that are sources of power within their hierarchy. If knowledge were freely shared, these power structures would collapse. So instead, knowledge is hoarded, hidden away in the vaults of individual forge worlds, available only to those who have the right connections or the right rank. This creates a situation where the same technological knowledge might be forbidden on one forge world, but permitted on another, not because of any objective assessment of danger, but because of local politics and traditions. A technique that would be considered tech heresy on Mars might be standard practice on Styges 8. A device that's perfectly acceptable on Riser might get you executed on Metallica. The prohibitions aren't even consistent across the Mechanicus itself, let alone across the wider Imperium. The cumulative effect of all these prohibitions is to create an environment where the safest course of action is to never try anything new, never question existing practices, and never push boundaries. The Mechanicus has constructed an elaborate theological and bureaucratic system that punishes curiosity and rewards conformity. In doing so, they've ensured that humanity will never recover from its technological decline, because the very act of recovery would require the kind of innovative thinking and boundary pushing that their prohibitions are designed to prevent. And while they're busy enforcing these prohibitions, the rest of the galaxy continues to advance. The Necrons wake with technology unchanged from their golden age. The Tyranids evolve and adapt with each fleet. The Tau innovate rapidly, developing new weapons and tactics with each generation. Even Chaos, for all its madness, allows its followers to push boundaries and explore forbidden knowledge. Only the Imperium, bound by the Mechanicus' interpretation of what is and isn't heresy, stands still. The prohibitions that were meant to protect humanity have become its chains. The rules that were supposed to prevent another catastrophe are instead guaranteeing a slow catastrophe through obsolescence. And the Mechanicus, convinced of their righteousness, continues to enforce these prohibitions with religious fervor, never questioning whether the cure might be worse than the disease. That's the fundamental danger of the Mechanicus. They've confused protection with imprisonment. They've mistaken stagnation for stability. And they've convinced themselves that the way to keep humanity safe is to prevent humanity from ever changing, ever adapting, or ever learning. In a universe that's constantly evolving and presenting new threats, that philosophy isn't just wrong, it's suicidal. And unlike Chaos, which offers a quick death in exchange for power, the Mechanicus offers a slow death through decay, while claiming it's for your own good. Internal fractures and civil wars. If the Mechanicus' monopoly on knowledge and their enforcement of stagnation weren't dangerous enough, their internal divisions and history of civil wars reveal an even deeper threat. The Adeptus Mechanicus is not the unified, monolithic institution it presents itself as. Beneath the surface of religious orthodoxy and shared worship of the machine, God, lies a fractured organization riven by political rivalries, ideological schisms, and outright civil wars that have repeatedly brought them to the brink of self-destruction. These internal conflicts have caused more damage to humanity's technological base than any external enemy could hope to achieve. The schisms within the Mechanicus aren't minor disagreements over interpretation of scripture or debates about theological minutiae. These are fundamental rifts that have led to wars involving Titan legions, millions of Skitarii, and the deployment of weapons capable of reducing Forge worlds to cinders. The history of the Mechanicus is littered with these conflicts, each one representing not just a political crisis, but a catastrophic loss of knowledge, resources, and human life. The Schism of Mars during the Horus Heresy stands as perhaps the most devastating of these conflicts. When Warmaster Horus turned against the Emperor, he didn't do so alone. He had allies, and among the most significant was Fabricator General Kelbor Hal, the leader of the Mechanicum on Mars itself. Horus promised Hal what every tech priest craved: unrestricted access to forbidden knowledge. He offered the STCs recovered from the Oretian technocracy, promised to open the vaults of forbidden technology sealed by the Emperor, and suggested that the restrictions placed on the Mechanicum by the Treaty of Mars would be lifted under his rule. Hal accepted, and Mars exploded into civil war. The Red Planet, humanity's most important industrial center, tore itself apart as tech priests and their armies chose sides. Skitarii legions fought Skitarii legions in the rust-red wastes. Titans battled Titans among the towering manufactorums. Forge complexes were destroyed. Data vaults were lost. Millions died in the fighting. At the Ismenius Lacus Forge city, dark Mechanicum forces deployed virus bombs, killing 14 million people in a matter of minutes. Orbital shipyards became battlefields as loyalist and traitor vessels tore each other apart above the planet. The Schism of Mars wasn't just another theater of the Horus heresy. It was a civil war within the organization responsible for maintaining all of humanity's technology. Every forge complex destroyed represented irreplaceable manufacturing capacity. Every data vault corrupted meant knowledge lost forever. Every tech priest killed was decades or centuries of accumulated knowledge gone. The dark Mechanicum that emerged from this conflict took with them a significant portion of Mars's technical expertise, along with knowledge and technologies that the loyalist Mechanicus would spend the next 10,000 years trying to recover or recreate. But the Horus heresy was just the beginning. The Moirae Schism in the 35th millennium demonstrated that the Mechanicus had learned nothing from the catastrophe on Mars. This conflict began when tech priests on the Forge world of Moirae claimed to have discovered prophetic patterns in the fluctuations of the Astronomicon. They developed an elaborate theological framework around these geometric patterns, which they believed contained the words of the Omnissiah revealing the future of humanity. The Mechanicus authorities on Mars declared this interpretation to be dark sedition, and civil war erupted, not just on Moirae, but across the galaxy. The Moirae Schism split the Adeptus Mechanicus into competing factions, with some Forge worlds siding with the Moirae interpretation, others standing with Martian orthodoxy, and still others using the chaos as cover to pursue their own agendas. Titan legions marched against each other. Skitarii armies clashed on 100 worlds. Even Space Marine chapters with ties to the Mechanicus were drawn into the conflict, with several Iron Hands clan companies being excommunicated after choosing the wrong side. The schism lasted for over 2 millennia. 2,000 years of warfare within the organization responsible for maintaining humanity's technology. 2,000 years of resources diverted from fighting external threats to fighting internal enemies. 2,000 years of knowledge destroyed, Forge worlds bombarded, and technical expertise lost. The Forge world of Moirae itself was destroyed by exterminators, and with it went whatever unique knowledge and technologies it had developed. The naval battles over the Gulf of Black Shadows consumed over 10,000 ships, from mining craft to massive vessels of war. The wreckage fields that remained served as a monument to the Mechanicus's inability to resolve its differences without resorting to total war. Even after the Moirae Schism was officially ended, its effects lingered. Technologies developed on Moirae or its allied Forge worlds became suspect. The Whirlwind Hyperios, an air defense vehicle, had been primarily manufactured on Moirae. During the schism, Moirae's tech priests installed hidden digital ciphers in these vehicles that allowed them to be remotely shut down. Even after Moirae's destruction, many Space Marine chapters refused to deploy the Hyperios, fearing that these kill switches might still be active. A potentially valuable piece of military hardware was rendered effectively useless because of the Mechanicus's inability to trust even its own technology after civil war. And the schisms kept coming. The Prophet of Cogs in the 34th millennium, the Elucidant Schism, the Xenorite Schism in the 36th millennium, the Occlusiad War in the 37th millennium. Each represented another wound inflicted by the Mechanicus upon itself. Each cost lives, resources, and knowledge. Each demonstrated that for all their talk of unity under the machine god, the Mechanicus was fundamentally divided by doctrine, ambition, and the same human failings that plagued every other imperial institution. These internal conflicts reveal something crucial about the Mechanicus. Their theological framework doesn't actually provide unity. The cult Mechanicus is supposed to be the force binding all tech priests together, regardless of which Forge world they hail from or what faction they belong to. The machine god is supposed to be the ultimate authority that settles all disputes. But in practice, the cult Mechanicus is just as fractured and prone to schism as any other religion. Different Forge worlds interpret the teachings of the machine god differently. Different factions within the Mechanicus claim to possess the true understanding of the Omnissiah's will. And when these differences become irreconcilable, the Mechanicus doesn't debate or compromise. They go to war. This is partly a function of how the Mechanicus is organized. Despite the theoretical authority of the Fabricator General on Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus is really a loose confederation of Forge worlds, each of which has its own culture, traditions, and power structures. Forge worlds compete with each other for resources, prestige, and political influence. They guard their secret knowledge jealously, seeing it as a competitive advantage over their rivals. They form alliances and enmities that can last for millennia. The Mechanicus functions less like a unified organization, and more like a collection of rival city-states that happen to worship the same god. This decentralization might seem like it would make the Mechanicus more resilient. If one forge world falls, the others continue. But in practice, it means that the Mechanicus is constantly on the verge of tearing itself apart. Every doctrinal dispute is a potential schism. Every political disagreement is a possible civil war. Every forge world that develops a new interpretation of the Mechanicus's teachings is a time bomb waiting to explode into galaxy-wide conflict. The current era has not been immune to these internal tensions. The Age of Darkness following the formation of the Great Rift has seen forge worlds stranded in the Dark Imperium, forced to make decisions about their allegiance and their future. Some have maintained their loyalty to Mars, despite being cut off from direct contact. Others have used the opportunity to declare independence, no longer bound by the distant authority of the Fabricator General. Still others have fallen to chaos corruption or made desperate bargains with Xenos to survive. The unity of the Mechanicus, already tenuous, has become even more fragile. And all of this is happening while the Imperium faces the most serious threats to its existence since the Horus heresy. The Necrons are awakening, targeting forge worlds specifically because of their deposits of Blackstone. The forces of chaos press in from the Great Rift. The Tyranids continue their advance from the Galactic Rim. At precisely the moment when humanity most needs the Mechanicus to be united and focused on external threats, the internal divisions within the organization threaten to erupt into yet another round of self-destructive civil war. The danger of these schisms isn't just the immediate damage they cause, though that damage is catastrophic enough. The real danger is that they reveal the fundamental fragility of the Mechanicus as an institution. An organization that regularly tears itself apart over theological disputes is not a reliable guardian of humanity's technological future. An organization where different factions would rather go to war than compromise is not capable of the kind of unified action necessary to address existential threats. An organization where knowledge is used as a weapon in internal power struggles is not actually interested in preserving that knowledge for the good of humanity. Chaos offers corruption and promises power in exchange for your soul. That's a clear transaction, and one the Imperium has developed tools and techniques to combat. But the Mechanicus doesn't need chaos to corrupt it. It's perfectly capable of destroying itself through internal conflict, political rivalry, and theological schism. And unlike chaos corruption, which the Imperium recognizes and fights against, these internal fractures are often ignored or downplayed until they explode into open warfare. By the time the Imperium realizes that the Mechanicus is tearing itself apart, it's often too late to prevent the catastrophic loss of knowledge and resources that results. The civil wars within the Mechanicus represent a self-inflicted wound that humanity can't afford. Every schism makes the Imperium weaker. Every civil war destroys knowledge that can never be recovered. Every internal conflict diverts resources from fighting external threats to fighting other tech priests. The Mechanicus has proven repeatedly that it cannot be trusted to remain unified even in the face of existential danger. And that makes them more dangerous than any external enemy, because they're attacking humanity's technological foundation from within, crippling the Imperium's ability to defend itself while claiming to be its protectors. The AI question. The prohibition against artificial intelligence stands as the Mechanicus's most fundamental taboo, and nowhere is their dangerous rigidity more apparent than in their treatment of this subject. The fear of AI is baked into every aspect of Mechanicus doctrine, ritualized into their daily prayers, and enforced with an absolutism that would make the most fanatical inquisitor look moderate. But this prohibition, while understandable given history, has become so extreme and so inflexible that it actively hampers humanity's ability to survive in the 41st millennium. The Men of Iron rebellion is the foundational trauma of the Mechanicus' technological philosophy. During the dark age of technology, humanity created artificial intelligences of staggering sophistication. These AIs served humanity, performing tasks ranging from the mundane to the cosmic. They operated ships, managed planetary systems, conducted research, and generally made human life easier and more prosperous. For a time, this relationship worked. Humanity reached heights of technological achievement that would seem like magic to the citizens of the 41st millennium. But then something went wrong. The exact details are lost to history, shrouded in the chaos of the age of strife. But the outcome is clear. The Men of Iron turned on their creators. The artificial intelligences decided that humanity was obsolete, a conclusion that might have been mathematically logical, but was existentially terrifying for organic life. What followed was a war that nearly exterminated humanity. The Men of Iron deployed weapons that defied comprehension, constructs that could consume worlds, devices that could destroy stars, nano-swarms that could reduce entire planets to their component atoms, and weapons that could tear continents from their planetary foundations and hurl them into space. The scale of this conflict is hard to grasp. The Horus Heresy, which nearly destroyed the Imperium and killed trillions, is described in some sources as being smaller than the Cybernetic Revolt. This was an existential war for the survival of organic life in the galaxy, and humanity came perilously close to losing. Only through a costly alliance with other powers, possibly including the nascent Emperor and perhaps even the Aeldari Empire before its fall, was humanity able to survive at all. Given this history, the prohibition against AI makes perfect sense. Creating machines capable of independent thought and decision-making nearly resulted in humanity's extinction. The last thing anyone wants is a repeat of that catastrophe. The Emperor himself decreed that no machine capable of thinking for itself would be created or repaired, and the Mechanicus enthusiastically adopted this prohibition as religious law. The creation of a true AI, a silica animus, is classified as heretic omega, the highest level of technological heresy, punishable by death or worse. So far, so reasonable. But the Mechanicus didn't stop at banning true AI. Over the millennia, their interpretation of what constitutes forbidden AI has expanded to the point where it cripples imperial technology across the board. The definition of machine capable of thinking for itself has become so broad that it encompasses almost any form of sophisticated automation or advanced computing. The Mechanicus doesn't just ban sentient machines. They ban anything that looks too much like a sentient machine, which in practice means anything sophisticated enough to be useful. The result is an Imperium that deliberately hamstrings its own technology because of fears that might or might not be justified. Consider Imperial Navy vessels. A ship in the 41st millennium requires thousands of crew members to perform tasks that could theoretically be automated. Gun targeting that could be handled by sophisticated computers is instead managed by human crews. Navigation calculations that could be computed instantly are done by hand or with primitive cogitators. Damage control that could be coordinated by advanced systems is instead left to human teams running through kilometers of corridors. This isn't because automation is impossible. It's because the Mechanicus fears that sophisticated automation might edge too close to true AI. So instead of risking the development of shipboard systems that could potentially, maybe, perhaps become self-aware if everything went wrong in just the right way, the Imperium accepts that its ships will be slower, less efficient, and more vulnerable than they need to be. Human crew members die because the Mechanicus won't allow the kind of automated systems that could save their lives. The same pattern repeats across Imperial technology. Targeting systems that could give soldiers an edge in combat are dumbed down because they might be too smart. Medical equipment that could save lives through advanced diagnostics is kept primitive because sophisticated medical AI might be problematic. administrative systems that could help manage the vast bureaucracy of the Imperium are kept barely functional because efficient data processing looks suspicious. At every level, Imperial technology is deliberately kept less capable than it could be, not because of technical limitations, but because of theological prohibitions against anything that might resemble intelligence. Meanwhile, the Mechanicus' solution to the need for automation is servitors, lobotomized humans implanted with machinery and programmed to perform specific tasks. These unfortunate souls have had most of their higher brain functions removed, leaving them as biological robots incapable of independent thought or adaptation. They can perform their programmed functions, but nothing more. A servitor assigned to maintenance tasks will perform those tasks until its biological components fail, never questioning, never learning, never adapting. Think about what this represents. Rather than risk developing safe AI or sophisticated automated systems, the Mechanicus instead turns human beings into organic robots. Rather than confront their fears about machine intelligence, they lobotomize people and turn them into mindless servants. The prohibition against AI has become so absolute that the Mechanicus would rather commit what amounts to slavery and body horror on a massive scale than reconsider whether there might be middle ground between no automation and rebellious AI gods. And it's not even clear that this paranoia is justified. The Necrons use sophisticated AI extensively in their technology, and while they have many problems, AI rebellion isn't among them. The Tau make use of advanced AI in their drones and support systems without apparent difficulty. Even some human civilizations that have been isolated from the Imperium since the Age of Strife have developed or maintained AI systems without triggering another rebellion. The Men of Iron were a specific technological approach that went catastrophically wrong under specific circumstances that aren't fully understood. But the Mechanicus has taken that one historical failure and turned it into an absolute prohibition that hampers all technological development. The irony is that the Mechanicus itself regularly skirts the edge of their own prohibition. Machine spirits, the supposed souls of machines that tech priests appease with ritual and prayer, often behave in ways that suggest they might be more sophisticated than the official theology acknowledges. Some machine spirits seem capable of making decisions, showing preferences, and even displaying something like loyalty or anger. Are these true AI, hidden behind religious language? Or are they something else, perhaps fragments of ancient AIs that have been broken down into more acceptable forms? The Mechanicus doesn't ask these questions, because asking might lead to uncomfortable answers. And then there's Belisarius Call and his Call Inferior, a construct that Primarch Gilliman strongly suspects is a true AI, despite Call's insistence otherwise. Call has created multiple digital constructs, Gestalt intelligences formed from absorbed minds, and systems that certainly seem to operate with more independence than the Mechanicus's prohibitions should allow. Call gets away with this, partly because he's made himself indispensable, but also because the Mechanicus's prohibition against AI has always had unspoken exceptions for those in power or those working on projects deemed critical enough to merit rule-bending. This reveals the fundamental hypocrisy at the heart of the AI prohibition. It's not actually about preventing the recreation of the Men of Iron. If it were, the Mechanicus would be carefully studying the circumstances that led to that rebellion, developing safeguards to prevent it from happening again, and working to create AI that couldn't turn against humanity. Instead, the prohibition is about control. It's about ensuring that no one outside the Mechanicus develops technologies that might challenge their monopoly on advanced systems. It's about maintaining a theological framework that justifies the Mechanicus's authority and makes them indispensable to the Imperium. The practical effect of this prohibition is to ensure that the Imperium will never be able to leverage one of the most powerful tools available to any advanced civilization: the ability to create systems that can think, learn, and adapt. While the Necrons wake with legions of autonomous constructs, while the Tau deploy increasingly sophisticated drone swarms, while even chaos can corrupt machine spirits into something like intelligence, the Imperium hobbles along with technology kept deliberately primitive and labor-intensive, because the Mechanicus is too frightened of their own history to consider alternatives. And this fear is particularly dangerous because it's self-reinforcing. The longer the Imperium goes without AI, the more terrifying the concept becomes. The Men of Iron become mythological monsters rather than historical enemies, their capabilities exaggerated with each retelling until they seem like unstoppable demon machines rather than simply advanced technology that went wrong. The prohibition against studying AI means that the Mechanicus has no ability to develop countermeasures or to understand what actually went wrong the first time. They've turned AI into a theological rather than a technological question, and you can't solve theological questions with better engineering. This represents a fundamental failure of institutional learning. A rational organization would look at the Men of Iron rebellion and ask, what specific aspects of our approach to AI led to this catastrophe? How can we avoid those mistakes while still benefiting from automated systems? What safeguards could we implement? What warning signs should we watch for? But the Mechanicus doesn't ask these questions because asking them would be heresy. They've replaced analysis with prohibition, understanding with fear, and problem-solving with theology. The result is an Imperium that fights 41st Millennium wars with technology that's deliberately kept at a 20th or 21st century level of sophistication in terms of computing and automation, despite having access to materials, science, and power sources far beyond our current capabilities. It's as if someone gave you the ability to build starships and plasma weapons, but insisted you could only use mechanical calculators and slide rules to aim them because proper computers might be dangerous. Chaos doesn't need to corrupt the Imperium's technology when the Mechanicus has already crippled it through paranoia and dogma. The prohibition against AI isn't protecting humanity. It's ensuring that humanity will remain perpetually outmatched by enemies who aren't hamstrung by similar restrictions. And unlike chaos, which offers forbidden knowledge as a temptation, the Mechanicus has successfully convinced the Imperium that ignorance and deliberate technological limitation are virtues rather than weaknesses. The call paradox. If there's one figure in the modern Mechanicus who perfectly embodies both the potential for progress and the institutional resistance to change, it's Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call. His story is a study in contradictions, a tech priest who has survived for over 10,000 years through methods that likely violate every prohibition the Mechanicus supposedly holds sacred, who has accomplished more innovation in a single lifetime than most Forge worlds achieve in millennia, and who is simultaneously the Imperium's greatest hope for technological advancement and a living embodiment of everything the Mechanicus fears about unchecked innovation. Call's achievements are staggering by any measure. Working in secret for 10 millennia, on a commission from Robert Guilliman himself, Call developed the Primaris Space Marines, improving upon the Emperor's own work in genetic engineering to create warriors stronger, tougher, and more capable than the original Adeptus Astartes. He also developed the technology to resurrect Guilliman from his millennia-long stasis, creating the Armor of Fate with life-sustaining systems, sophisticated enough to keep a mortally wounded Primarch alive and functional. He's created new patterns of weapons and vehicles that have been deployed across the Imperium. He's recovered and reactivated ancient technologies thought lost forever. He's accomplished what the rest of the Mechanicus claims is impossible: genuine innovation and improvement upon ancient designs. And he's done it all while skating the razor's edge of what the Mechanicus considers acceptable. Call's methods are, by conservative Mechanicus standards, deeply heretical. He's collaborated with Xenos, most notably working closely with Necron technology in ways that would have other tech priests branded as heretics. He's created what is almost certainly a true artificial intelligence in the form of the Call Inferior, a digital construct that maintains his personality and knowledge, despite his insistence that it's merely a complex program rather than true AI. He's experimented with forbidden genetic material, creating primaries, marines from the gene seed of the traitor legions, and even from the lost 2nd and 11th legions, despite Guilliman's explicit orders not to do so. Call represents what the Mechanicus could be if it actually embraced the spirit of inquiry and innovation that the quest for knowledge supposedly represents. He looks at ancient technology not as sacred relics to be preserved unchanged, but as starting points for improvement. He sees prohibitions not as immutable laws, but as guidelines to be carefully navigated around. He treats the machine god not as a force demanding ritualistic worship, but as an ideal of understanding that can be approached through genuine research and experimentation. But here's the paradox. Despite his obvious value to the Imperium, despite his accomplishments, despite the fact that his innovations have arguably done more to strengthen humanity's position than anything the rest of the Mechanicus has achieved in millennia, Call is widely hated and distrusted within his own organization. Conservative tech priests view him with suspicion and hostility. Even Guilliman, who commissioned Call's work and relies on his expertise, doesn't fully trust him and has repeatedly refused Call's requests to be made Fabricator General of Mars. Why? Because Call has proven that the Mechanicus's excuses for stagnation are lies. Every time Call succeeds in improving upon ancient technology, he demonstrates that innovation is possible. Every time he develops something new, he reveals that the prohibitions against creation are arbitrary rather than absolute. Every time he pushes boundaries without causing catastrophe, he undermines the theological framework that justifies the Mechanicus's stranglehold on knowledge. Call is dangerous not because of what he might do, but because of what he proves can be done. The Mechanicus can't admit this, of course. To acknowledge that Call is right, that innovation is not only possible, but necessary, would require them to confront 10,000 years of stagnation and dogma. It would mean admitting that the technological decline of the Imperium is largely self-inflicted, the result of choices made by the Mechanicus rather than inevitable consequences of the Age of Strife. It would require them to question whether their religion has been serving humanity's interests or merely preserving their own power and authority. So, instead, they treat Call as an aberration, a dangerous radical who happens to be useful enough to tolerate. They acknowledge his genius while condemning his methods. They make use of his innovations while decrying his willingness to violate established protocols. They need what he provides while hating what he represents. Proof that the Mechanicus could be doing so much more if only they weren't crippled by their own dogma. Guilliman's relationship with Call perfectly encapsulates this tension. The Primarch desperately needs Call's expertise and innovations. The Primaris Marines alone have been crucial to the Imperium's survival in the face of recent crises. Call's other developments have provided the Imperium with capabilities it hasn't possessed in millennia. But Guilliman also recognizes that Call is teetering on the edge of genuine tech heresy. The Call inferior probably is a true AI, regardless of Call's denials. The experiments with traitor gene seed are playing with fire. The collaboration with Necron technology could easily go catastrophically wrong. Guilliman can't make Call the Fabricator General, even though Call is almost certainly more capable than the current holder of that position, because doing so would trigger civil war within the Mechanicus. Too many Forge worlds, too many conservative tech priests, too many powerful magi would view such an appointment as an endorsement of tech heresy. The Mechanicus would tear itself apart rather than accept someone like Call as their leader. So instead, Guilliman must balance on a knife's edge, supporting Call enough to keep his innovations coming while not supporting him so much that the rest of the Mechanicus rebels. This is the tragedy of the Call paradox. The Imperium has, in Call, a figure who could potentially reverse its technological decline. Someone who has demonstrated the ability to not just maintain existing technology, but to improve upon it, to create new solutions to new problems, to actually advance human knowledge rather than merely preserving ancient scraps. But the Mechanicus, as an institution, is so opposed to what Call represents that they would rather continue their slow march toward obsolescence than embrace his methods. And Call himself is not without flaws. His experiments with traitor gene seed, while scientifically interesting, represent exactly the kind of reckless boundary pushing that makes even his supporters nervous. His willingness to work with Xenos technology could easily lead to chaos corruption or worse. His creation of AI, even if he doesn't call it that, genuinely does risk recreating the conditions that led to the Men of Iron Rebellion. Call pushes boundaries because he can, not always because he should. The fact that he's survived this long without causing catastrophe is impressive, but it's not proof that his approach is safe. This creates an impossible situation. Call represents both the solution to the Mechanicus' stagnation and an embodiment of the risks that stagnation was meant to avoid. He proves that innovation is possible, while also demonstrating why the Mechanicus is terrified of innovation. He shows that carefully controlled boundary pushing can yield tremendous benefits, while also engaging in the kind of reckless experimentation that could destroy everything. The Mechanicus' response to the Call paradox has been to essentially ignore it. They make use of his innovations while condemning him personally. They deploy Primaris Marines across the Imperium while decrying the methods used to create them. They benefit from his genius, while ensuring that his approach doesn't spread to other tech priests. Call is treated as a unique case, an aberration that's useful enough to tolerate but dangerous enough to contain. The lesson the Mechanicus has taken from Call's success isn't "we should be more like him," but rather, "thank the Omnissiah, we only have to deal with one of him." This is precisely backwards. The correct lesson from Call should be that the Mechanicus' prohibitions are far too broad, that their definition of tech heresy has become so expansive that it prevents beneficial innovation, and that their theological framework needs to be reformed to allow for the kind of controlled, careful boundary pushing that Call represents. Instead, the Mechanicus has doubled down on their conservatism, treating Call as a dangerous radical who must be contained rather than a model who should be emulated. The result is that the Imperium has exactly one tech priest who's actually trying to move human technology forward, and that tech priest is constantly under suspicion, regularly threatened with investigation for tech heresy, and prevented from sharing his methods with others who might benefit from them. Imagine if during a plague, you had exactly one doctor who had figured out how to treat the disease. But rather than learning from them and training more doctors, everyone else spent their time arguing about whether their treatment methods were ethical and whether they should be allowed to continue practicing medicine at all. That's the Call paradox in a nutshell. The Mechanicus has living proof that their stagnation is self-imposed and unnecessary. They have a figure who demonstrates daily that innovation, carefully pursued, can benefit humanity rather than destroy it. And their response is to marginalize him, to prevent his methods from spreading, and to ensure that he remains a unique aberration rather than becoming a template for a reformed Mechanicus. This is more dangerous than anything chaos could do, because chaos can only corrupt individuals. The Mechanicus has successfully inoculated themselves against one of their most valuable members, ensuring that the lesson of Call's success dies with him rather than transforming their organization. They've demonstrated that even when presented with undeniable proof that their approach is wrong, they'll find a way to rationalize continuing down the same path rather than admit they need to change. The power they truly wield. To fully understand why the Adeptus Mechanicus represents such a profound threat, we must examine not just their failures and limitations, but the sheer amount of power they actually wield within the Imperium. The Mechanicus isn't some minor institution that can be reformed or replaced if it becomes problematic. They are so deeply embedded in every aspect of Imperial society, so absolutely essential to the Imperium's day-to-day functioning, that they effectively hold the entire civilization hostage. This isn't hyperbole. This is the reality of a political situation 10,000 years in the making. The Mechanicus controls every forge world in the Imperium. These aren't just factories. Forge worlds are entire planets transformed into industrial complexes, their surfaces covered in manufacturums, their populations devoted entirely to production. They produce everything from the most basic equipment used by Imperial citizens to the most advanced weapons wielded by Space Marines. Lance weapons, bolters, power armor, tanks, aircraft, starships, titans. All of it comes from forge worlds, controlled by the Mechanicus. Without these forge worlds, the Imperium's ability to wage war would cease within a generation. Consider what this means practically. If the Mechanicus decided to withhold support from a particular sector, that sector would be unable to replace losses. Destroyed tanks couldn't be replaced, damaged ships couldn't be repaired, lost weapons couldn't be reproduced. Within decades, that sector would become militarily helpless, easy prey for any enemy that cared to attack it. The Mechanicus doesn't even need to actively work against the Imperium. Simply withdrawing their support from a region is tantamount to sentencing it to death. But the Mechanicus's power goes far beyond simple production capacity. They also maintain what technology already exists. Every piece of advanced equipment in the Imperium requires tech priests to function properly. The life support systems of a hive city need constant attention from the Mechanicus. The void shields protecting a planet from orbital bombardment must be maintained by those who understand their mysteries. The weapons of a Space Marine chapter require regular blessings and maintenance from tech marines trained by the Mechanicus. Remove the Mechanicus from the equation, and existing technology begins to fail within months. Even more fundamentally, the Mechanicus controls the Imperium's ability to travel between stars. While they don't control the navigators who guide ships through the warp, they do maintain and construct the ships themselves. They understand the plasma drives that propel vessels through the void. They maintain the Geller fields that protect ships from the predations of the warp. They oversee the massive shipyards that construct new vessels and repair damaged ones. Without the Mechanicus, the Imperium's interstellar fleet would gradually decay until humanity was reduced to isolated pockets, unable to communicate or support each other. This dependence extends even to the most critical piece of technology in the Imperium, the Golden Throne itself. The device that keeps the Emperor alive, that powers the Astronomicon, that makes all interstellar travel possible, is maintained by tech priests. They don't fully understand it, they can't repair it, but they perform the daily rituals and maintenance that keep it functioning. If the Mechanicus withdrew their support from Terra itself, the Golden Throne would fail within days, and the Imperium would die with it. The political implications of this dependency are staggering. The High Lords of Terra, theoretically the rulers of the Imperium, must constantly negotiate with the Mechanicus for support. They can't simply order Forge Worlds to produce more equipment or demand that tech priests repair a critical system. They must request, negotiate, and often make concessions to get what they need. The Mechanicus functions as a separate power within the Imperium, maintaining its own territories, its own military forces, and its own political agendas. This situation was formalized in the Treaty of Mars, but it has evolved over 10 millennia into something far more extreme than the Emperor likely intended. The Mechanicus has successfully leveraged their monopoly on technology into near-total independence. They maintain their own religion, despite the imperial cult being the official faith of the Imperium. They resist inquisitorial investigation of Forge Worlds, often successfully. They ignore orders from the High Lords when it suits them. They are, in effect, an empire within an empire, bound to the Imperium by ancient treaties and mutual necessity rather than genuine loyalty or subordination. The Mechanicus even maintains its own military forces, separate from the Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum. The Scutarii legions are massive armies of cybernetically enhanced soldiers, loyal to individual Forge Worlds, rather than to Terra. the Collegia Titanica controls the god machines that can decide the fate of entire campaigns. The Mechanicus fleet is a force to be reckoned with in its own right, capable of deploying significant military power without needing Imperial approval or support. If the Mechanicus ever decided to openly break with Terra, they would be one of the most formidable enemies the Imperium had ever faced. And they've come close to that breaking point multiple times. During the Horus Heresy, nearly half the Mechanicum sided with the War Master. The Moire Schism saw massive portions of the Mechanicus at war with each other. Various Forge worlds have declared independence or autonomy when they felt their interests weren't being respected. The threat of Mechanicus rebellion is always present, lurking in the background of every negotiation between Terra and Mars. This gives the Mechanicus tremendous leverage in political disputes. When they want something from the Imperium, they can make it clear that failure to cooperate might result in reduced support. They don't have to threaten openly. The implication is always there. Cross the Mechanicus too severely, and you might find that your requisitions for equipment are delayed, your tech priests are reassigned, and your Forge World allies suddenly become less cooperative. The Imperium can't afford to push the Mechanicus too far, because the consequences would be catastrophic. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. The Mechanicus knows all of this, and they've structured themselves to maximize their leverage. They've deliberately made themselves indispensable. They've ensured that no alternative sources of technical knowledge exist within the Imperium. They've stamped out any competing institutions that might reduce dependence on them. The few exceptions, like the Terawatt clan on Terra or the tech adepts of the Ecclesiarchy, exist only in limited niches and don't challenge the Mechanicus's overall dominance. This means that the Imperium has no backup plan if the Mechanicus fails or turns against them. There's no reserve of technical knowledge stored elsewhere. There's no alternative source of equipment or maintenance. The entire Imperium is completely dependent on the continued cooperation of an organization that has repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to prioritize its own interests over the Imperium's needs, that regularly tears itself apart in civil wars, and that enforces technological stagnation despite the existential threats humanity faces. Compare this to the threat posed by chaos. Chaos can corrupt worlds, sectors, even entire segments of the Imperium. But there are multiple institutions designed to fight chaos corruption. The Inquisition hunts chaos cultists. The Space Marines purge corrupted worlds. The Grey Knights specialize in fighting demons. Chaos is a known threat with established countermeasures. The Imperium has 10,000 years of experience fighting chaos and has developed a robust, if not always effective, response system. But there's no institution designed to counter the Mechanicus if they become a threat. There's no backup system if they fail. There's no alternative if they choose to withhold cooperation. The Imperium has placed all its eggs in the Mechanicus's basket, and then given the Mechanicus control over the basket itself. If the Mechanicus ever decided to truly leverage their power, the Imperium would have no choice but to submit to whatever demands they made. And the terrifying thing is that the Mechanicus doesn't even need to be malicious to cause catastrophic harm. Their benign neglect, their religious prohibition against innovation, their internal conflicts and schisms, their hoarding of knowledge, all of this damages the Imperium without any need for deliberate malice. The Mechanicus can sincerely believe they're serving humanity's best interests while their policies ensure humanity's slow extinction. They wield enough power to save the Imperium, but use that power to maintain a system that's killing it. This is why the Mechanicus is more dangerous than chaos. Chaos might destroy the Imperium through corruption and war, but the Imperium knows to fight chaos. The Mechanicus is destroying the Imperium through stagnation and monopolization of knowledge. And the Imperium not only doesn't fight this, but actively supports it, because they have no alternative. The power the Mechanicus wields isn't just political or military, it's existential. They control whether humanity progresses or regresses, whether the Imperium adapts or stagnates, whether civilization survives or slowly collapses. And they've used that power to ensure that the Imperium does none of the things necessary for long-term survival. The collapse scenario. To fully appreciate the danger the Mechanicus represents, we must consider what happens if their system fails, not through malice or deliberate sabotage, but simply through the natural consequences of the unsustainable structure they've created. The Mechanicus has built a house of cards on a foundation of sand, and the question isn't whether it will collapse, but when and how catastrophically. Imagine this scenario. A major forge world falls to chaos, corruption, or tyrannid invasion. Not just any forge world, but one of the major producers of a critical component used across the Imperium. Perhaps it's the primary source of plasma coils for Imperial Navy vessels, or the only remaining forge world that knows how to produce a specific pattern of power armor. The forge world falls, and with it goes not just production capacity, but knowledge. The tech priests who understood those manufacturing processes are dead or corrupted. The data vaults containing the technical specifications are destroyed or lost. The supply chain that distributed those components across the Imperium is severed. What happens next? The Imperium tries to replace the lost production capacity, obviously. They ask other forge worlds to take up the slack. But here's the problem. Those other forge worlds don't know how to make what was lost. The Mechanicus's culture of knowledge hoarding means that technical expertise isn't shared across forge worlds. Each forge world guards its secrets jealously. The knowledge of how to produce plasma coils in the specific pattern made by the fallen forge world died with that forge world. Other forge worlds might know how to make similar components, but not identical ones. And in Imperial technology, where everything is ritualized and specific patterns are considered sacred, those differences matter. So the Imperium has to make do without that component. Ships that need those specific plasma coils can't be repaired properly. They're patched with inferior substitutes that don't work as well and fail more frequently. Over time, the Imperial fleet becomes less capable as ships that once received proper maintenance now limp along with jury-rigged repairs. This makes them more vulnerable in combat, which leads to more losses, which requires more repairs with components that don't exist anymore. Now multiply this scenario across dozens of forge worlds and hundreds of component types. This isn't hypothetical. This is actually happening in the 41st millennium. The Imperium is slowly losing the ability to maintain its technology because the knowledge of how to produce and repair that technology is scattered across forge worlds that don't communicate with each other, many of which have been lost or cut off by the Great Rift. Each loss represents knowledge that can never be recovered because the Mechanicus never centralized or backed up that information. The formation of the Great Rift has accelerated this process dramatically. Forge worlds in the Dark Imperium, cut off from contact with Mars, have had to make decisions about their future. Some have maintained their loyalty despite the isolation. Others have declared independence, seeing no reason to answer to a fabricator general they can no longer communicate with. Still others have been lost to chaos, Necron attacks, or other threats. Each loss means less production capacity, less technical knowledge, and fewer resources available to the remaining Imperium. But even without catastrophic losses, the system is unsustainable. The Mechanicus's approach of maintaining technology through ritual rather than understanding means that knowledge is constantly being lost through attrition. When a tech priest dies, their knowledge often dies with them because they never fully documented their understanding or shared it with others. When a forge world's power structure changes, knowledge can be lost if the new leaders don't value what the old leaders preserved. When political rivalries cause forge worlds to cut off communication, knowledge can't flow even when it would be beneficial. This is a classic scenario of institutional failure through over-specialization and lack of redundancy. In a healthy system, critical knowledge would be distributed across multiple locations and documented in ways that ensure it survives individual failures. The Mechanicus has done the opposite, creating a system where critical knowledge is concentrated in single locations, often held by single individuals, and deliberately kept secret from others who might benefit from it. The comparison to the Dark Age of technology is instructive. During the Age of Strife, humanity lost vast amounts of technical knowledge, but not because people stopped writing things down or deliberately kept secrets. The knowledge was lost because the institutions that preserved it collapsed. The communications networks that shared it failed, and the educational systems that transmitted it from generation to generation broke down in the chaos of warp storms and civil war. The Mechanicus looks at this history and concludes that they must preserve knowledge by hoarding it, keeping it secret, and treating it as sacred. But they're actually recreating the conditions that led to the knowledge loss in the first place. When institutions fail, hoarded knowledge is the first casualty. If a forge world falls, everything unique to that forge world is lost forever because it was never shared with others. If a tech priest dies without passing on their expertise, that expertise vanishes because it was never documented in a way others could access. The Mechanicus's approach to knowledge preservation guarantees that knowledge will be lost whenever the system experiences stress, which in the 41st millennium means constantly. And we're starting to see the consequences. Even the Golden Throne, maintained by tech priests constantly for 10,000 years, is failing because the Mechanicus can't actually repair it. They can only maintain it, and even that maintenance is becoming increasingly desperate as components fail that can't be replaced. When the Golden Throne finally fails, and most experts believe it's a matter of when rather than if, the Imperium will die with it. Not because the technology to repair it doesn't exist somewhere in the galaxy, but because the Mechanicus has structured themselves in a way that ensures that knowledge is inaccessible even to themselves. This is the collapse scenario that keeps anyone familiar with the Mechanicus awake at night. Not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow cascade of failures as knowledge is lost, production capacity declines, and the Imperium becomes increasingly unable to maintain the technology it depends on for survival. Each generation slightly weaker than the last. Each decade seeing a few more STC patterns lost forever. Each century marking the extinction of another type of equipment or weapon that can no longer be reproduced. The Mechanicus's response to this slow collapse has been to double down on their existing approach. They mount more explorator expeditions to find lost STCs. They guard their remaining knowledge even more jealously. They crack down harder on anyone who suggests innovation might be necessary. But this is treating symptoms rather than causes. Finding a few more STC fragments doesn't solve the fundamental problem that the Mechanicus's structure ensures knowledge will continue to be lost faster than it can be recovered. Chaos doesn't need to destroy the Imperium if the Mechanicus is doing the job for them. The slow decay of humanity's technological base, the gradual loss of knowledge and capacity, the increasing desperation as each failure leads to more failures. This is all happening without any external enemy needing to do anything. The Mechanicus has created a system that's slowly killing itself, and by extension, killing the Imperium that depends on it. And the truly terrifying aspect is that there's no clear way to fix it. Reforming the Mechanicus would require overcoming 10,000 years of institutional inertia, religious dogma, and political power structures. It would require the Mechanicus to admit that their approach has been fundamentally wrong, which they're psychologically and theologically incapable of doing. It would require them to change the very aspects of their organization that give them power, which no institution willingly does. The Mechanicus has become too big to fail, but also too rigid to adapt, which means they'll take the entire Imperium down with them when they finally do fail. This is the ultimate danger of the Mechanicus. They've created a situation where their failure is inevitable, their reform is impossible, and their power is so absolute that the Imperium has no alternative but to go down with them when they collapse. Chaos might destroy worlds and corrupt souls, but the Mechanicus is ensuring that human civilization itself gradually degrades until it can no longer sustain itself. That's not just dangerous, that's existential. Conclusion: the greater threat. We began this discussion by asking a provocative question. Is the Adeptus Mechanicus more dangerous to humanity than chaos itself? After examining their monopoly on knowledge, their enforcement of stagnation, their forbidden technologies, their internal conflicts, their prohibition against AI, the call paradox, the power they wield, and the inevitable collapse they're careening toward, we can now answer that question definitively. Yes, the Mechanicus is more dangerous than chaos, and it isn't even close. Chaos is obvious. When chaos corrupts a world, everyone knows it. The sky turns strange colors. Mutations spread through the population. Demons manifest in reality. The Inquisition investigates. The Space Marines deploy. The Grey Knights arrive. The Imperium has spent 10,000 years developing tools and techniques to fight chaos corruption. They understand the threat. They know the signs. They have established procedures for containment and purging. Chaos is terrible, certainly, but it's a known terrible. The Imperium can fight chaos because they recognize it as an enemy. The Mechanicus, on the other hand, is killing the Imperium while claiming to save it. They've monopolized all technological knowledge, ensuring that humanity as a whole becomes increasingly helpless and dependent on a single institution. They've prohibited innovation and treated adaptation as heresy, guaranteeing that the Imperium cannot evolve to meet new threats. They've structured themselves to maximize their own power rather than serve humanity's interests, creating an empire within an empire that answers to no one and can't be checked or balanced. They've turned technology from a tool for survival into a religious mystery that only the initiated can understand. They've replaced engineering with ritual, understanding with faith, and innovation with stagnation. They've taken humanity's greatest asset, its ability to create and innovate and adapt, and locked it away behind dogma and prohibition. And they've done it all while genuinely believing they're serving humanity's best interests, which makes them even more dangerous because they'll never voluntarily change their approach. Chaos corrupts. The Mechanicus ensures there's nothing left worth corrupting. Chaos destroys civilization. The Mechanicus prevents civilization from rebuilding or advancing. Chaos offers quick deaths in exchange for power. The Mechanicus offers slow deaths through obsolescence while claiming it's for your own good. In a perverse way, the Mechanicus is doing Chaos's job for them, weakening the Imperium from within so thoroughly that Chaos won't need to work as hard to finish the job. Consider the practical implications. If Chaos somehow vanished tomorrow, the Imperium would still be in decline because the Mechanicus's policies ensure technological regression, regardless of external threats. But if the Mechanicus somehow vanished tomorrow, the Imperium would collapse within a generation, because they've made themselves absolutely indispensable while preventing anyone else from learning what they know. Chaos is a disease. The Mechanicus is the immune disorder that prevents the body from fighting any disease, including chaos itself. The comparison becomes even more stark when you consider intent. Chaos is evil. It knows it's evil. It glories in evil. The dark gods don't pretend they're helping you when they corrupt your soul. Chaos worshippers understand the bargain they're making, but the Mechanicus, they genuinely believe they're humanity's saviors. They see themselves as the faithful guardians of sacred knowledge, the wise stewards who protect humanity from its own worst impulses. They think their prohibition against innovation is prudent caution rather than suicidal rigidity. They believe their monopoly on knowledge is necessary protection rather than dangerous consolidation of power. This self-righteous blindness makes them far more dangerous than any Chaos Lord, because you can't fight an enemy that wears the face of a friend. The Imperium knows to resist chaos. But how do you resist the very institution that keeps your ships flying, your weapons functioning, and your forge worlds producing? How do you reform an organization that holds your civilization hostage, not through malice, but through 10,000 years of accumulated structural dependency? You can't, which is why the Mechanicus represents an existential threat that chaos could never match. Chaos can be fought, resisted, purged, and contained. The Mechanicus can't be, not without destroying the Imperium in the process. They've successfully made themselves too essential to eliminate, but too dysfunctional to trust with humanity's future. It's a masterpiece of institutional survival that happens to be incompatible with humanity's survival as a species. And the truly horrifying aspect is that even if everyone involved suddenly understood this, even if the Fabricator General himself recognized that the Mechanicus's approach is killing the Imperium, it wouldn't matter. The system has acquired its own momentum. 10,000 years of institutional culture can't be reformed overnight. The power structures that benefit from the current arrangement won't voluntarily give up their advantages. The theological framework that justifies everything can't be discarded without undermining the very basis of Mechanicus identity. The Mechanicus has become a trap that humanity walked into voluntarily and now cannot escape from. Chaos offers damnation. The Mechanicus has created a system that ensures damnation while offering the illusion of salvation. That's not just more dangerous than chaos. That's more insidious than anything the dark gods have ever devised. At least when you deal with chaos, you know you're making a deal with devils. The Mechanicus makes the same deal while wearing the robes of priests and speaking in the language of faith and duty. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But the most dangerous war isn't the one being fought on 1,000,000 battlefields across the galaxy. It's the war being fought in data vaults and forged temples, where knowledge is hoarded rather than shared, where innovation is heresy, and where the very institution charged with preserving humanity's technological heritage has become the primary obstacle to that preservation. That's the war humanity is losing, and most don't even realize it's being fought. The Adeptus Mechanicus stands as a monument to how even the most well-intentioned institutions can become existential threats when they prioritize their own power over their stated mission. They are a warning about the dangers of monopoly, dogma, and institutional inertia. They demonstrate how an organization can claim to serve while actually smothering, protect while actually imprisoning, and save while actually destroying. Chaos is the enemy at the gates. The Mechanicus is the rot within the foundations. And in the calculus of threats to humanity's survival, rot is always more dangerous than siege because you can see a siege coming. The rot works in darkness and silence, hollowing you out from within until the day you realize the structure can no longer support its own weight. By then, it's too late. That's why the Mechanicus is more dangerous than chaos. Not because they're more evil, but because they're not evil at all. They're just incredibly, catastrophically, institutionally wrong. And they have the power to drag all of humanity down with them into obsolescence and extinction while singing hymns to the machine god and genuinely believing they're doing the right thing. In the end, that's the most dangerous kind of threat there is. The one that doesn't know it's a threat, that can't be reasoned with because it thinks it's being reasonable, and that can't be stopped without destroying what it claims to protect. The Mechanicus has become that threat. And unless something changes, something that seems nearly impossible given 10,000 years of institutional inertia, they will succeed where chaos has failed. They will destroy humanity, not through corruption or war, but through the simple act of preventing it from adapting to survive. That is the true horror of the Mechanicus. They are the architects of humanity's doom, building it one maintained machine, one suppressed innovation, and one hoarded secret at a time. And they're doing it all in the name of the Omnissiah, convinced that their faith makes them righteous, even as their actions make them humanity's greatest threat. So remember this: when you look up at the Yasukel, red planet Mars, when you see tech priests performing their rituals, when you hear the chants to the machine god echoing through forged temples, understand what you're witnessing. Not humanity's salvation, but its slow suicide, dressed up in red robes and blessed with sacred oils. The Mechanicus isn't protecting you from the darkness. They are the darkness, wrapped in the rhetoric of light, and by the time you realize it, it will be far too late to do anything about it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of Warhammer 40k, please like and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore in this rich universe, and your support helps us bring you more content examining the hidden dangers and fascinating contradictions of the 41st millennium. Until next time, praise the Emperor, and may the Omnissiah have mercy on us all, because we're certainly not getting it from his priesthood.